So welcome everybody to this Green Christian workshop on a very warm day. I think all across the UK, wherever you've come from. Tonight's workshop is titled Conservation Volunteering for Justice and Peace, brought to us by Reverend Andy Jowitt. You've probably seen something in his biography, and his talk does largely tell us his story. So I'm not going to go into great details about his biography. He's going to talk about his personal journey from teacher, I gather, to vicar, to how he became the community engagement officer for the A Rocha UK Foxearth Meadows Nature Reserve, which is about halfway between Cambridge and Ipswich. He'll explore our biblical mandate for caring for God's creation and how they're trying to fulfill this at Foxearth Meadows. You can find more reflections from Andy on the A Rocha website, if you Google his name. And we hope that this workshop will inspire you to think of more ways in which we, as Christians, can bring together practical action for the environment and our concern for justice and peace. Before Andy begins, we'll just begin with an opening prayer. God of creation, we praise you for the wonders of your world, for the beauty of earth, sky, and sea, for the repeated rhythms of cycles and seasons, and for the interdependence of all living things. Forgive us when we have sullied the beauty you have made, when we have disrupted the cycles of earth and climate, when we have broken our connection with your world. God, who inhabits the beauty and vulnerability of the world, forgive us, and in your generous love, help us to work with you for the renewal of the earth. And be with Andy tonight as he presents his talk, and give us ears to listen and learn from each other the ways we can serve you. Amen.
Amen.
That came from the Wild Goose Autumn book. So Andy is going to speak for about 20 minutes with some slides, and then there'll be breakout rooms, as we'll explain as you get there. So I'm now going to just do a screen share.
Thank you for your introduction, David, and good to be here. I recognize a couple of faces on the screen. Good to see you. So I'll say a little bit about how I came to be where I am and how I came to do what I do as a volunteer for A Rocha UK. It goes back, simply put, to a 3-month sabbatical in 2015. Going back further from childhood, I enjoyed being outdoors and learning a bit about nature. I think I was a YOC, a Young Ornithologist Club member in the days of old, but I never really developed those interests very deeply. I was aware of A Rocha, and I was aware of its biblical thinking about the importance for us as Christians to care for God's creation, but life was always a bit too busy to dig deeper. And then in 2015, the sabbatical gave me an opportunity to do that. I approached A Rocha UK, and my wife and I ended up spending 2 months weekly commuting from Milton Keynes to multicultural Southall in West London as volunteers, mainly working at a site called Woolfields. Woolfields is a 3-acre site, little triangle of land hemmed in by houses, school site, and a pub car park on the edge of Ealing Borough. It had been an allotment site, but was all but abandoned and was mainly used for fly tipping and drinking and doing drugs. A couple called Kim and Kailan Kongsai, who are from Manipur in North India, were mission partners with CMS and are seconded to A Rocha. And they had a vision to transform this bit of land. So Ealing Borough Council were approached. They'd actually pretty well forgotten they owned the land, and they were persuaded to lease it to A Rocha UK for a peppercorn rent, to transform it into a conservation land, community allotment, and an orchard. So it was pretty dire when they took it over. 50 tons of rubbish was removed, including a lot of syringes and bottles. And then piles were made, ponds were dug, fruit trees were planted, bird stations and beehives were installed, and a sensory garden was designed. So Jane and I joined the very multi-ethnic band of volunteers working on the site. Quite a lot of people actually in that area from the Sikh community. So we joined the volunteers on the site and welcomed school groups. We visited gurdwaras and churches and community groups. And we loved what Kim and Kailan were doing. That's Kim on the left of that picture. And I think Callum holding his youngest daughter, who's now a bit more grown up than that. And they were doing a great job building community, serving the community, and making a beautiful space, but from what had been a pretty dark place, giving people access to nature in an area where there's very little nature. So we were 2 months there in Woolfields, and then the sabbatical ended with a dream fulfilled. And that dream was to take my wife and daughter to East Africa, a couple of weeks in Uganda, partly to visit the area where I lived as a child, and partly to visit the area where I worked as a teacher back in my 20s. But first a week in Kenya to visit the A Rocha projects there. And they do some great stuff, like protecting the mango forests, which are so vital for coastal protection, protecting fish stocks and coastline. And the forests have been lost for timber and for development of hotels and other building sites. But the A Rocha project gives people the incentive to conserve them, training the local people as ecotourism guides for this amazing environment. And this is about a 2-kilometer boardwalk, quite wobbly. My wife was outside her comfort zone, but managed it. And people earn a living taking tourists around mangrove forests, and the profits from the scheme are then ploughed back into the local community, mainly in bursaries for secondary schools. And then there was another project called Farming God's Way, which is an agricultural method promoted by Rocha trainers, which uses a lot of mulching, and it dramatically improves yields and reduces the evaporation, which is so vital as rainfall decreases. Farmers using it are able to make a living and feed their families without cutting down more of the coastal rainforest, which is a precious and reducing resource. So we were really inspired by what we saw, and we loved the values that we experienced, summed up by these 5 C's. Christian, a biblical faith in the living God who made the world and entrusted us with the responsibilities to care for it. Conservation, practical work to do research, educate and equip people and restore nature. Community, developing good relationships within the organisation and within the local community. Cross-cultural, drawing on skills and insights from different cultures. And cooperation, working with a wide variety of organisations in the cause of a just and sustainable world. So, inspired as we were, we began to think towards retirement and offering an extended volunteer time to A Rocha, assuming that that would mean going back to Southall. Instead, we were asked to consider moving to Sudbury, which I'd never visited before, to help with building up the work at Foxearth Meadows, which is a little 12-acre nature reserve, which A Rocha had recently come into ownership of. And they needed us to start sooner rather than later. So there's a big decision. We visited Sudbury and we prayed, and we decided to say yes. And that meant taking early retirement and finding some part-time work in the meantime to keep us going. And we moved to Sudbury in a sense in faith, without jobs, but we were able to find jobs within a few weeks, actually both at a local care home. My wife's still working there as a care coordinator at the rehab unit, and I'm now a pensioner, and so devoted to the volunteering side entirely. I think one of my prayers in my life is my life a provocative life, provoking the question, why do you do what you do? And when we were asked that question, we've got a wonderful opportunity to say something about the faith that motivates us. As Peter puts it in his epistle, to give a reason for the hope that we have in us. So there's a lot I could say, but I think my most basic and maybe my most important answer to that question is to take people to the greatest commandment of all. You remember from Luke's Gospel, the expert in the law asked Jesus, "Teacher, what must I do to be saved?" And the expert and Jesus' response to that was, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And the expert came back with, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself." And I want to argue that loving God with all our heart must surely include loving all that is made. At each stage in the creation account in Genesis 1, God declares it good. But when it's all complete in all its complexity and diversity, he declares it very good. He didn't just make it and make it good, but he sustains it. And if God made it and sustains it with love and care, then surely we should love and care for it ourselves. It just doesn't make sense for us not to do that. And moving on to Genesis 2, Adam is commanded to till and to keep the land. I think keep implies to conserve the land. And through this command, we're given a responsibility to be caretakers, benefiting from the land, but also conserving it. We have no mandate to abuse it. It's not ours, as Psalm 24 says. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. We are not the owners, of course, of it. Yes, we are given dominion, but what does dominion mean? I believe that we reflect God's image in serving the planet in the way that Jesus came to serve the world. John, of course, says the cosmos in that famous verse. He came to serve as the servant king, not to be served, but to serve. I think this is how we should be exercising that dominion. And then, of course, the second part of the command, love your neighbour as yourself. That provoked the expert in the law to ask, who then is my neighbour? And that's a really important question for us to explore. I want to dig into it a little bit now. I believe that there's a case, in fact, to say that nature is our neighbour. We're creatures together. We're all part of the community of creation. But even if we just focus on our human neighbours, we find that caring for nature is key. Because what we do or don't do to care for nature has a huge impact, for good or for ill, on our human neighbours. The environmental issues we face today make us neighbours: nature depletion, pollution, degradation of the land, climate change, and so on. And these become justice issues because our actions have global impacts. They affect the lives of other people so dramatically. Plastic pollution, of course, illustrates this. What enters the water system in one place moves on and affects rivers and coasts and fish stocks and marine life in other places. It's estimated that the truckload of plastic enters the ocean every minute of every day. And of course, we offload our problems onto other countries and other people. Climate change makes the point very clearly, because climate change doesn't recognize national boundaries. It makes us neighbours across the globe. It's being driven by the developed nations, as we know, but it's affecting the poorer nations the hardest. The wealthy can take out insurance, but that's not an option for the poor. So the world, as we're realizing, is beginning to experience the consequences of global warming, weather events that are more violent and more frequent, in droughts, floods, wildfires, heat domes, and so on. So when we ask that question, who is my neighbour, doesn't our answer include people of the island nations of places such as Vanuatu, places which are in danger of becoming uninhabitable because of sea level rise? Or the people of Bangladesh, where farmland has been lost to flooding and salination? Or, for instance, the tea farmers of Kenya, whose crop relies on a dependable and reliable rain, but the rains are no longer reliable and their crop is suffering. The people of the Sahel, where land once viable for agriculture is no longer viable. Of course, parts of the Sahel and equally parts of the Middle East and parts of South Asia are now being affected by climate change in a way that creates migration pressures, and migration pressures create conflict. What about nature depletion? What kind of world will we pass on? We've actually reduced significantly the abundance of wild living things. And the abundant world that God has entrusted to us is not as abundant, sadly, as it was. So when it comes to future generations, what kind of world will we be passing on? The future generations are surely our neighbours too. And will it be a healthy world or one depleted and impoverished and stripped of its abundance? So having looked at our biblical motivation, I want to move on to Foxearth Meadows and tell you a bit about the place where I volunteer, and how we try to fulfill our covenant responsibility there. What are our aims? I'd say threefold. Of course, there is a conservation aim. We want to be a good place for nature. Adam was a gardener, and in a sense, we're gardeners there in Foxearth Meadows, trying to create the best possible habitat, or maybe rather a mosaic of habitats. One of our headline species is dragonflies and damselflies. These are banded demoiselle, the the male with the metallic blue body and the female with the metallic green. And there you see a male and female in cop creating the wheel of this heart shape. Another male trying to muscle in. And the males have these banded wings, which give the impression of a flying bow tie when they're in flight. And there's an emperor, which is the largest of our British dragonflies. Actually, sorry, that's a mistake. That's a southern hawker. I've got the wrong slide there, but if it was an emperor, it'd have a more solid blue body. I'll have to weed that out. And I'll move on to the next one, which is that's correct. That's a four-spot chaser. And these feisty creatures often try and mob the emperors in the way that we see crows mobbing a buzzard and trying to move the emperor, which is patrolling its territory from its dominance of the pond. So, as well as odonata, which is dragonflies and damselflies, there's plenty of bird life on the reserve. And people love to see the kingfishers, but just as important are the little brown jobs like the warblers, like this next slide, which will show the chiffchaff and a reed warbler. I'm struggling to learn birdsong, which is so important when it comes to identify some of these birds, but the chiffchaff is quite kind because its call, of course, is chiffchaff, or I would argue chaff-chiff, but there we go. There are otters on the site. First of all, we've got a few amphibians. There's toads, very few newts, and well, in fact, no newts and very few frogs, but plenty of grass snakes and lizards. There's quite a lot of activity there. And there are otters seen occasionally. They're very rarely seen. I've only seen them once. That was actually Good Friday a year and a half ago. And I was opening up the reserve and just checking all was well. And there was a mother with two cubs, two kits, frolicking in the water. I was well made up that day. But it's more often we see their sprains or the remains of a crayfish meal that they've left half eaten. We would love to see watervole. We should be seeing watervole, but mink has been a problem, and we're hoping that they will come back. That's a dream which we hope to fulfill. Going back to our aims, our second, not equally important aim is to be a good place for people, a place where people have access to nature and benefited from it for their physical and mental well-being. This, I actually believe, is a justice issue because access to nature is so important for human flourishing and is unequally distributed. So Foxearth Meadows is open access and free access. We run events like National Meadows Day. I think this is actually an Act for Nature Day where we're learning about different aspects of conservation. We try and encourage people to come onto the site. We welcome schools, primary and secondary, and youth groups. We've also done a lot recently with providing access for people with special needs. We've been trying to improve the site for mobility, but also for people. We've had opportunities to welcome people with learning disabilities. So, for instance, the Bridge Project is a local charity which provides meaningful activity for adults with learning disabilities, and they come once a month. They're a happy crew. They learn about nature, do craft activities and conservation tasks, and it's just fantastic seeing them with that sense of achievement of a job well done. Fortnights, next slide, is a young people's group for people with learning different disabilities, and so they come each summer just to be outdoors, nature walk, games, and so on, and they love to come. Causeway Fellowship is a Christian fellowship which is Sudbury based, and this is actually from a recent day on the reserve, Bank Holiday Monday, when they came for a picnic and activities, and that's from the worship time. And what had happened there was that Helen on the right with the guitar started to lead He's Got the Whole World in His Hands, and it proved a favourite because there was some rush to come up to the front to join the signers and to make this impromptu choir singing joyfully. And it's just fantastic to see people enjoying being in the outdoors and having access to nature. And thirdly, our aims on the reserve are that it's a place that honours God. And I'm going to sum that up with 4 W's. My first is work. And work is an honourable thing. And so we work to restore the natural world. And those are pictures from a Friday, from our regular conservation volunteering days. They're a hard-working bunch, but a cheerful bunch, and a friendly crowd, and do a variety of jobs according to their capacity. Other work as well, of course, includes data protection, bio-blitzes and transects and reading bird surveys and bird bringing, a whole variety of stuff. But moving on, worship is my next title. Nature, I think, worships by being what it is and doing what it does. The trees of the field shall clap their hands, the mountains and the hills will burst into song from Isaiah, or Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God and the skies declare his handiwork. So nature worships, but we want the reserve to be a place of worship too, like an outdoor cathedral. And there are prayer walks, and local churches hold events here. And that's actually from one of our regular outdoor services. We do usually 2 a year, one coming up quite soon on the 24th of September. And people come from far and wide to join in worship, the outdoors. And my next W is welcome. We try to be a place of welcome to people of all ages and all backgrounds and all abilities. So we have children, and that's a school group on the right, on a wet autumn day in the marquee. I think the group on the left is actually preparing for a bat walk and making campfire bread. We were pleased last year to be able to host the Ukrainian refugee sport group from the area, and they came for a day on the reserve. So we love children to be up close and enjoying nature, because so often their lives is nature deprived. We want to give them the opportunity. My final W is witness. We want to be a witness to people in the environmental world, hopefully doing a good job of looking after the environment, doing good conservation work. We want to be a witness to people in general, offering a place of beauty and peace, so that through people experiencing God's creation, they can actually be drawn close to the Creator himself. And going back to where I started, provoking that question, why do you do what you do? And giving us the opportunity to explain how what we do is part of our Christian mission. It's part of our love for God, caring for all that is made. It's part of our love for our neighbour, wanting our neighbours near and far to be enjoying the abundant life that God wants for us and in an abundant world. And explain that our God is a God of justice and peace. So we work for justice and peace as we care for his world. So these are my 3 questions which I'm going to give to you to do some thinking on. Where do you find hope? The fact is that nature is still in decline in our country, and we're facing huge issues for the future. So where do we find hope? My second question, how can we help people to understand that caring for the environment is a justice issue? How can we bring that home? And how can we live lives that are positive and provocative? Hopefully provoking that question, where is the hope? Why do you have that hope in you? And why do you do what you do?
All right, then. Thank you very much, Andy. That's been a wonderful introduction. Beautiful slides too. I'll definitely, if I'm ever going down that way, I'll be heading towards Foxearth Meadows.
Very welcome.
So what we're going to do now is go into breakout groups for 10 minutes. And during that time, if each group can pick up the questions that Andy has just put there. Can they be posted into the chat? Have they been? So let me change. Yes, they are. Thank you. So they're in the chat. You can talk about those, and we'll come back and have a reasonable time of Q&A and discussion of those questions and other questions people might have for Andy. Right. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you've had sort of productive 10 minutes together, working through some of the issues in those questions and other things that might have come to mind. So for those, if you have questions, I'll try to follow. Either you can post them in the chat and I'll watch that, or you can use the, it's under reactions, the raise hand, I think that's right. Yes, the raise hand function under reactions at the bottom of your screen. And I will try to follow the order in which people raise hands. So first question from somebody. Don't forget to thank Judith. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Actually, think about it. It's a very topical one. I was outside Parliament today. I go there every week take part in an earth vigil and pray for the environment. But today we were joined by a very, very noisy protest, a group of people who were anti-ULEZ, and lots of whistles, lots of car horns. They got some very old cars that were driving around Parliament Square, and some quite impolite placards too. And it seemed to me that I prefer this question: how would we help people understand that caring for the environment is a justice issue? They were very concerned to focus on their right to drive their car wherever they wanted, regardless, and didn't seem to take on board, it seemed to me, the fact that actually nobody has a right to occupy the road to exclude anybody else. And a lot of people, there's a lot of injustice around transport, people's access to it, not everyone can afford a car. And if people are driving polluting cars, the injustice that it causes to people who suffer with ill health. So how do we go about trying to have a useful discussion with people of that mindset?
Andy.
Well, spot there. It's a very difficult issue because people are not always willing to listen, and somehow we need to be able to engage in a way that people listen. And I think the confrontations often don't create much listening. I found myself thinking a bit about the fact that the Gilets jaunes movement in France scuppered Macron's environmental legislation, which is sad. But I think part of it was that, in fact, it was the poorer people going to be hit hardest. So there's a way in which somehow we need to bring change in which affects people in a way that is just in that way, that not hitting the poor hardest. So I think there's an issue there. The way we actually bring in the changes in the legislation. But I think the big issue is how do we find ways in which to engage with people in ways that will create listening rather than confrontation, which doesn't usually change hearts and minds. I don't know whether other people got wisdom to share on this.
We do actually have a session coming up in a couple of months, which is around this question of how to talk to people who have very different views. So do come back. We'll be plugging that one in due course, as they say. It's a tricky one. I think we've all thought about that one. Another question, or there's what's from Catherine, actually, about thinking about the link between Judith's point and intergenerational justice. So consideration of mitigating impact of climate change on future generations. Yes, this is a big one. And again, it's one that some people don't really see. I don't know if you have comments on that and how this might work in relation to Foxearth Meadows.
Well, we are creating heritage of the future. And we're in the first age geological era, which is actually an era where human activity has shaped the earth, and the Anthropocene. And so I think there's a huge issue of what we pass on for the future. And we can be living in the present thinking I can survive my next 20 years of my life and okay, but what about the future? And I think that's a very big Christian responsibility to look to the future. Christians can take different lines on this, and I think there's some difficult interpretations. People have said to me, "Let's bring on the time when Jesus will come back," and I think that's not in our gift. And In the meantime, we need to be caring for the stewards caring for what we've been entrusted with rather than allowing it to be trashed. I think one thing that's maybe led people astray is the idea that this world will be replaced. And I find it interesting that the Greek word for new, when Peter, for instance, talks about a new heaven and a new earth, is the word kainos, which means renewed rather than neos, which means brand new. I think this is quite key to our interpretation of those biblical texts.
Mm.
And so we're called to be part of the renewal of the earth.
Thank you. Another question from somebody. While you ponder, then, if somebody, do you want to say something about how I? Oh, Barbara.
Okay, I was just wondering, you've got at Foxearth, you seem to have a large number of people, different groups of people, they're very diverse groups of people coming there. Are you aware of them? I realise they may not all have their own gardens back home, but even in the depths of London and our cities, there's often wild areas that are like, initially the reserve was. Have you any sort of stories coming back of people being inspired by what they've seen at Foxearth and going back and doing something in their own neck of the woods?
Yes, so we've had people build ponds in their own gardens, and it's surprising how even a small pond can attract dragonflies and damselflies, and it's reaps a reward. We try and encourage people towards eco-church programs in the local area, and the eco-church helps people to think about how they use the church land, but also how they use their own land. And so we hope that there is an overspill. I can't say I've got data to back it up, but certainly some anecdotal evidence.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Obviously, you're not collecting data, but so that's interesting. You are getting anecdotal stories coming back that people have gone off and done something.
That's right.
You're doing, which is really wonderful. Yeah.
And I'm almost in like the advertising bureau here, but there was a talk from a couple of months ago about church gardens and things like that. That's on YouTube for those who either some of you might have been there or which you might want to look at. That was partly the question I was thinking of asking myself. But another one is just, how did Foxearth Meadows come about? You wouldn't immediately think of A Rocha having a meadow in Sudbury.
I'll tell you the story. There was a guy called Keith Morris who worked in insurance and pensions. He was from East London and living in Essex, and he used his savings and to buy up land for conservation. Because he had a great passion. He was a Christian who had a great passion to care for God's creation, loved dragonflies and damselflies. So he saw the potential of Foxearth Meadows to be a conservation area. It had been just a wetland meadow. At one stage, it was ploughed up, in fact, but I don't think it was very successful as agricultural land. And then someone bought it to dig the ponds, to sell the gravel, and to stock them with trout for weekend fishing to make some money. And so Keith saw the potential. He cleared the trout and started to plant trees and develop it as a conservation area, dug more ponds. And he sadly died of cancer in 2009, and his widow Maureen, who's still very involved with us, needed to sell the land. I think the local wildlife trust looked at it, but decided it was not a site that they were terribly interested in. And Keith was already involved in A Rocha. In fact, he helped set up A Rocha Czech Republic, and was involved in founding that with Pavel, who's a Czech national. And so A Rocha did some thinking and praying and had an appeal. Maureen gave a good price for it, and it came into A Rocha's hands. So what Keith began, we've been able to continue, but with a more sort of outward public face to what we do, and opening it up to more people from the local community. So that's the story behind it, how it came about.
That's a wonderful story. I don't know if people know of other similar things around the country, but quite often when you're traveling around, you sort of see these bits of land that don't seem to be useful for agriculture, and they look a bit boggy, and you sort of think, oh, yeah. I don't know if anybody else knows of similar kinds of projects or
So slightly different, but I'm thinking of the two projects I know of that thrive. The Therapeutic Horticultural Association runs. One's in Battersea in South London, and the other in Birmingham. And again, using land that wouldn't be used for growing otherwise, and transforming it, and inviting people in, diversity of people to enjoy and learn about growing.
There's a question here, which is a very practical one, from Rod. Does it cost a lot to run, and how easy would it be to replicate?
The main cost is the cost of the salary for the manager, who's now 3 days a week. He was 4 days a week, but now 3, looking to retirement. We could do with a full-time person, really, because Mark's great and he's a wonderful guy, the fund of knowledge and the real heart for the work. But the 3 days don't give him the capacity to do really what needs to be done in terms of the opportunities we have. I'm not the expert in natural history that Mark is, so although I can get groups involved and bring them along, I can't give them the expertise that Mark can. So that salary is it's not a huge salary, is the main cost, but we depend a great deal on volunteer labour. So we have a great team of people who work every Friday there at the site. So we'll be there this week, cutting paths to bring a digger onto the site to dig out the ponds which got silted up, and a really good-hearted bunch. We have other volunteers for other events, and the local AONB volunteer team come in as well. And I mentioned the bridge project, so they're volunteers as well. So in a sense, it's a job creation thing to find things that they'll enjoy doing, but they do things which are purposeful. So it's a lot of volunteer support that makes it possible.
Right. No, that's always as partly is actually getting hold of the land, and you were pretty lucky that happened. It's not the sort of thing, but there are often enough people around who want to donate land for various causes. I think there's one called Craghouse Farm just outside Leeds. That's a Christian charity that supports. Their beneficiaries are usually people from sort of challenging or from disabled backgrounds, which is a farm. I don't know how they got hold of it, but there is also there's an environmental element to that as well as farming. They have a restaurant and all that sort of thing. But you need to have the resources and that to sort of get the place in the first place, and then work out how to run it, which I think they do from a combination of charities and the shops they run. They also have a gardening centre which works well as well.
Could I add something briefly to that, David, please? So I think Craghouse Farm works with local churches, and particularly St George's Church in Leeds. So I wondered, Andy, whether Foxearth Meadows has support from local churches as well.
We're building it, yes, and we're building relationship with local churches. So local churches together is very supportive, and churches have been coming to use the site for worship and for prayer walks and picnics, and supportive of the services we run ourselves as well. So that's been really encouraging, and so we started an eco church support group in the area. So we're doing an eco quiz in a week's time, and we host meetings at different churches. For instance, just look at things like managing the churchyard for nature, or mowing regimes, how we can have a green Christmas. These have been some of the things we looked at, and we've worked with the local Natural History Society to do churchyard surveys, to do botanical surveys, and that's been a really good partnership.
That's really good. I think there's a lot of sort of, many of us here personally might not have the resource to do this sort of thing ourselves, but you might know somebody or be in an organization where a church that does have some people who could support these sorts of things. That sounds really. You can bring those various things together. It sounds really positive. Any questions from anybody else? I think the hosts have been saying quite a lot for one. What have been particular challenges, apart from paying the manager? What sort of things tend to be challenges that somebody who might be thinking of doing something like this might need to bear in mind?
Right, big question. I think working out the balance between the needs of people and the needs for nature, and finding the right sort of compromise for that. So, for instance, I tend to mow the paths wider than Mark does because he's always all for nature encroaching, whereas I'm thinking of people in wheelchairs. So it's not a serious conflict, but just intrigued by the different needs which we're trying to balance. Other challenges. Trying to think at the moment, but I'll let you know when I've thought of some.
Oh, I mean, one of them I can think of because it's a problem in my allotment is things like bindweed and the sorts of things you probably wouldn't want lots of.
Yes, I think the issue is how much you intervene. So, for instance, nettles are important, but we don't want the whole site to be covered in nettles. So, you're gardening. So there's a rota of mowing the meadows and raking off, and actually it's been very effective in creating more biodiversity. So ponds need to be looked after, and they silt up, and they get covered over with reed beds, and we needed open water for certain species. So you're always balancing the different needs.
Now, we certainly see there's a pond near us where they clearly have that kind of problem of trying to get the water levels right, because if it gets too low, then it stinks, and the birds are not happy. But obviously,
I think one of the challenges we face is runoff from a nearby agricultural land. I think the nitrates in the water, the phosphates, are a bit higher than they should be, which is from the fact that the fields nearby, which are above the reserve, use fertilizers and insecticides, herbicides. We'd love to see that reduced, and we'd love to see more margin around the fields, but people are slow to change. In a sense, you're vulnerable to some things going on around, and I think we need to create more connectivity where we can join land and create larger areas of conservation rather than little islands which are vulnerable in themselves.
Yeah, Catherine.
Andy, as Foxearth is such a welcoming place, have you considered working with social prescribers to help people benefit socially from coming?
That's a very good question. We have worked at that, and we had visits from the people from the district council who were involved in that, and we were all set to welcome people. And then the council scrubbed the plan and redrew it, and we didn't reconnect with what happened after that. So these things seem to be prey to chopping and changing on the council level. We've written to GP surgeries, but I think they're inundated with their own agendas.
Well, if you know a local occupational therapist, that might be a route to go by.
Thanks for the tip. Yeah.
There's also, as Catherine's put in the chat, did anybody have anything from the questions that they wanted to contribute? Particularly, I liked how can you be provocative and positive in lifestyle, particularly the provocative one. Did anybody have anything to contribute about that?
Possibly. Well, it just came to mind. I do a monthly local group litter pick, and I have to carry my litter pickers. And so I can't really carry them in my hands because I'm litter picking. I have to carry them for the rest of the group. So I took the car down, and suddenly the obvious became very clear. I have a wheelbarrow and I live quite close to where we pick. So I could just put the litter pickers in the wheelbarrow. And I feel that's been slightly provocative because it's being different in the neighbourhood. So
anybody else?
Suggest one thing?
Yes, do, Andy.
Hospitality. I think hospitality is an incredibly positive thing where we can be true to our own values, but be generous with them as well. And so obviously we try to be hospitable on the reserve, but hospitality in our churches and homes, I think it makes a huge impact, because people are opened up by hospitality to listen and to think.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's probably an important way to engage.
Hospitality can, as well as providing refreshments and space for talking, can include a local walk, as I experienced a few weeks ago in Bexhill with Barbara. But I live near an inner city field, and it's just a lovely place to take people. It's 5 minutes walk away, and some conservation volunteering goes on there, and it's just a 20-minute walk all the way around. So perhaps think of a green space you can share while you're offering hospitality.
Is anybody here got any involved with any local sort of conservation group or any conservation work? I mean, I help coordinate about a dozen of us who look after our churchyard. So we have part of it, Andy, that we managed for some years as a wildflower meadow, and we were out there raking up the grass a couple of weeks ago. But we've noticed by working in the churchyard, it often we get in conversation with people who just happen to be passing through. There's several paths go through, and so it's not people who've got any connection with the church necessarily, but they're curious about what we're up to, and it makes a very good way of connecting with people who wouldn't otherwise have any communication probably with the people who worship in the church. And we did an open day a couple of years ago, and we combined it with a chance to go into the church and try the church bells out, and that got a lot of interest. And again, people actually going into the church who maybe wouldn't necessarily have done so before, but it was great fun for them to go in and actually, under supervision, have a go at ringing one of the church bells. Anybody else had anything like that, or got an opportunity to?
Well, not quite the same thing, Barbara, but the Jubilee Cooperative Farm down in Nairn, near me in Northern Ireland, is has got a social justice and an environmental element to it. The farm is being run to obviously to try and make a bit of a profit, but that's been a struggle. But it does do work with probation service and school children, and the other part is the bottom end of the farm is not very suitable for agriculture, so they're using that as a rewilded area for promoting biodiversity. So that's the place where I can volunteer once a month to try and help them progress. So that's something slightly similar, but it has got more of a sort of a sustainable food production element to it as well.
Yeah,
that's pretty valuable. Andy, yeah, go on.
Just on the food theme, I've heard of some fantastic things done in churchyards with bits of communal herb beds and communal allotment areas. Also, theme gardens like 23rd Psalm Garden or a Canticle of the Sun Garden. Churches are created to welcome people into, and they're kind of intriguing, and people are interested in what's going on and can ask the questions as they pass by. Sounds a bit like what you were saying.
And those sort of conversations in casual environments can often be better than sort of going up to somebody face to face, sort of saying, "What do you think about this?" It's
really.
I'm creating a wildflower border. I belong to a gardening group. We mainly just do ordinary exotic plants with bedding plants, but I've been trying to sort of suggest doing wildflowers, and they asked me to do a wildflower border area, so I've been creating that this year, which is it's sort of transitioning it from exotic to partly wildflowers, so that's been enjoyable, and it's nice to talk to people as they go past, sort of community involvement.
Yes, that's great. So that's another thing, is the transition from traditional gardens which are often not actually very healthy from a wildlife point of view, to something a bit more friendly to the local environment and likely to nurture it more. Does anybody else have any questions, comments, anything that you said in your breakout groups that you'd like to talk about or ask questions about? If I take that as everybody's said what they think they can say for now, I think there's a lot to take away and to think about that might, that might see, might see a short session of an hour or so tonight, but it may lead to more things if you go away and think about them. So if I just hand over to Catherine now, who's going to say a couple of things about our next session and a prayer.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Andy, and thank you, everyone. There are so many positives, lots of positives to take away tonight. Next time we have a Green Christian workshop, it'll be led by Reverend Imogen Ney. Imogen's a vicar at St Paul's Church in Cambridge. She has a track record in enabling churches to engage with eco-church again, and has research interests in contemporary nature writing, Christian understanding of creation, and, ideal for a day as warm as today, the spirituality of wild swimming. So her workshop's going to be on nature spirituality, particularly thinking about water. And again, as today, that'll be linked by Imogen to this season of creation's theme, let justice and peace flow. There is a slight change to the day that this workshop will be. We usually have them on the first Wednesday of the month, as you know. Imogen's not available on the Wednesday in October, so this workshop will be held on Tuesday, October the 3rd. Please look out on the Green Christian website or for emails for registration nearer the time. Now is a good time to close in prayer. I have a prayer that I found in Ruth Valerio's book, Saying Yes to Life, and it was written by Prisca Lyotard in France. So let us pray together. Lord, be praised for the immensity and beauty of your creation. We pray with humility to be every single day aware of the variety of species on Earth and to seek for their protection. We thank you for the calling to take care of our planet that you have put in many hearts, and we pray that many others will follow. We ask for the grace to be able to see the world with your eyes and to always be amazed at the places we are blessed to go. At times, when we are discouraged by the amount of ecological issues, help us to know we stand before holy ground and to believe that you can make everything possible. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Catherine. And finally, it's me to thank Andy for a very interesting, inspiring talk, workshop that I think has given us all something to think about, whether it's a pond in our backyard to something sort of in the wider community that we might be able to get involved in or suggest. So thank you very much, Andy, for that. And thanks for Catherine for doing the tech stuff at the back, as I know from my own experience, that's always, a tricky job, and it's gone well tonight. So thank you, everybody. We hope to see you again at future workshops.